Rabbi Yirmiyah asked a question. The question that he asked was, the question that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked was, what if you find a bird that had one leg within 50 amas of a shoivich and 1 foot past 50 amas? So they said, Valdo Avkul Rabbi Yirmiyah, they threw him out. What are you asking such a nudna question, right? And we learned that Tosfos said it wasn't because it was a nudna question. The Gemara always asks such questions. They threw him out is because he sort of didn't take seriously. He rejected Rav Ukva Bar Chama's hard and fast rule that a medada could never go more than 50. So if even 1 foot is over 50, it can't be a medada, right? So that shouldn't the question. So someone told me over, Shlomi Ox told me over, that there's a Maisa with the Ger Rebbe. Everybody wants to down with the Rebbe Rosh Hashanah Kippur, right? So they had a rule in Ger that if you're over 50, then you could daven with the Rebbe first day Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah. And if you're under 50, those who are under 50, daven with the Rebbe the second day Yom Tov. So there was one guy whose birthday was the second day Rosh Hashanah. So he goes to the Gabba of the first minyan, and he said, I'd like to daven here. So the Gabba asked him, are you 50? He says, I'll be 50, second day Rosh Hashanah. I'm sorry, on the first day Rosh Hashanah, you're not 50. So if you're not 50, you can't daven with us. So then he goes to the Gabba of the second minyan, and he says, can I daven with you the second day? So the guy asked him, are you 50? He says, well, I'll be 50 on the second day. I'm sorry, you can't daven with us. So he said, it's not fair. I'm kerech mikal mikal. I want to at least daven with Rebbe one day. He said, no, a rule is a rule. We're not letting you in. So he was very upset. So he went to the Rebbe and he told the Rebbe it's not fair. So the Rebbe says it's a befurshik of Bava Basra. If you have 1 foot on one side of 50 and 1 foot on the other side of 50, it's very out. Too bad for you. Okay. Dr. Hedley Gemara. I told Shlomi, if you could only have told me this yesterday, it would have been so much better. I had it in my pipik. I had to hold it in, but I was lucky that I said Finkel's shir last night, and they're up there, believe it or not, they're up to date. So I was able to, relieve myself of it. Otherwise, I'd be in a bad mood today. Okay. Dr. Hedley Gemara. I want to go back a little bit, even though we got on to Amud Aleph, we're going to go back a little bit. And our discussion is Roiv Odif or is Korev Odif? What takes precedence? So Rav Chanina, at the beginning of the Gemara, said that Roiv trumps, I had to use that word, Roiv trumps Korev. Tashma, Nimsa Bein Shnei Shoifchais. You found this little birdie between two Shoifchais. And Rashi tells us that the Gemara at this point holds that it's more than 50 away from both of the shaykhs. Karv Lazar Shaloi. Karv Lazar Shaloi. Correct Gemara. The Afagad, the Chad Minayu, Nofish Mechavrei. I don't understand. The Rashi. I'm sorry. So there is a Rashi on this. So again, so Zok to Gemara, the Afagad, the Chad Minayu, Nofish Mechavrei, even though one is further away than the other. It's very possible that one city had more people than the other city. And if you're going to tell me that Roiv trumps Karev, so then who cares if it's closer to one? If the other city has so much, if the other Shoivich has so many more birds, so let's say you have one Shoivich that has 100,000 birds. It's an industrial bird production plant. And the other one's just a private little one that has 3 or 4 birds in it. You're going to say that this bird came from the Karev? There's a Roiv there. So you have a Rai that Karev is stronger than Roiv. We're speaking about 2 Shoivichs that are of equal size, and there is no Roiv. But Avad, if there's a Roiv, you would go Basa the Roiv. But there is a Roiv. It's more than 50 away from this Shoivich. It's more than 50 away from that Shoivich. So say it comes from the belt, and therefore it should be mutter for the finder to keep it. And it shouldn't go back to one of the owners of these 2 Shoivichs. You didn't just find a bird in the middle of nowhere. You found it in a row of kromim. Now you know what it's like. If you're in a row, I think of a cornfield. If you're in between 2 rows of a cornfield, you could see way down the row, but you can't see on either side of the row because you have a wall of vines on either side. So here you had this birdie that was in a shvil shel kromim, and there was one shayvach on the one end, one shayvach on the other end. So all this birdie can really see, even though it might be more than 50 amas away, are these two shayvches. So therefore, the Isa, the Alma Osi, what do you want to say? That the birdie didn't come from one of these two shayvches, it came from somewhere else? It could never possibly happen that way. Why? Given the midity, since this bird is a bird that doesn't fly, rather it's a bird that just hops a little bit, loy motzi osi, it could not have possibly come from any other shayvich other than one of these two. The chol the midity, the hadar chazi lekine midity, the loy midity. The way little birdies are is, yes, they venture away from their nest, but they keep on looking back to mommy. And if they see mommy, then they can continue going. But once they lose sight of mommy, they get terrified. They don't move anymore. So this birdie had to have come either from one shayvich or from the other shayvich. It couldn't have come from anywhere else. You know why? Because it can't see anywhere else. So therefore, we know for sure it came from one of these two shayvichs. So therefore, you don't say it came me'alma, and therefore finders is not keepers. Rather, it goes back to the owner of the shayvich that's closest. I had to go past 50. I don't know, but I guess this was an exception. But we're definitely sure that it didn't come me'alma. Now, that's the pashtus of the reading of the Gemara. That it's the whole reason for the Gemara. Why we don't say it's my alma is because the birdie wouldn't go. Tosfos actually has a little bit of a different shot in the Gemara, so let's see Tosfos inside. The chol the mididi ihadar chazi lekinei mididi. You don't really need this svara. Even the shaykh in the alma yoser mechamishim min akramim, since all the other shaykhim are more than 50 amas away from kramim, then anyway you wouldn't be choishish that it comes from ruba d'alma. The general rule that a medada would never go more than 50 would apply here, excluding the possibility that it comes from anywhere else. It's more than 50 away from the two shaykhim in discussion. Also, Tosfos wants to say that maybe the Maskana we're going back and they say that it's within Chamisha. Rashi learned that it's out of Chamisha. So Tosfos seems to say that the two shaykhim here in discussion would have been within the Chamisha. So then Ashishaper, the Karab Lazar Shaloi, the closest shaykhim is the owner of this bird. Afilu nimsa. Oh, I'm sorry. Afilu nimsa chutz lachamisha mam. Tosfos was saying even if you're more than 50 amas away from one of the shaykhim that's in between the kramim, you would still say it belongs to one of the shaykhim. The lenovak mitaris midade. Normally you say a bird won't be midade more than 50 amas. But here, where there's like a cocoon, it's in its safe little space, the idei kramim, through the fact that it's surrounded by kramim, mididi yoser mechamisha. It'll go even more than chamisha. So that's what Tosfos as far is. I think it's the way we were learning. So the pshat is, normally you say a bird won't go more than 50. So any other shayvich besides these two shayvichim that are in question, we have that rule. It won't go more than 50. But you know where it will go more than 50? If it's in a protected area in between two kramim, then it could have went more than 50, and therefore it's logical to say that this birdie came from one of the two shayvichim that are here in existence.
Being afraid to leave a certain area as opposed to it's too far for it to walk.
It could be, but Tosfos says first you don't need that svara. And that's what Tosfos starts with. Tosfos wants to use only the chamishim svara to do that. Ella Iri, the afilu im yeshayvchen the alma bein akramim. So what Tosfos is trying to say, even if the other shayvchim are also bein akramim, still you have the svara here that it wouldn't. Those two are I guess those two are the closest. Other ones that are a little further, it wouldn't be going past those. Tosfos, the Gemara is trying to use this svara even if there were other shayvchim within the kramim as well. Void when we do not get shvil, since it's a shvil meaning like a path. Mashma she'elu beit shayvchim b'sayich shvil. It's mashma that the two sorry, thank you so much. Mashma these two shayvchim are in that row. Nipol, this little baby bird, kamoykein nimtza b'sayich shvil. The lekala meches she'em shayvchim the alm. Therefore, it's not likely that it came from a different shayvich. I feel that even if they're not far away at all. Even if it was in the next row and it was even closer, we're not choshed that this bird came from there because it will not go there if it cannot see. Who it must be from one of these two, they never mafsek because there's nothing separating in between the two. So Tosfos is saying that the svara badada actually tells you that even if it's closer, even if the other shayvich is closer, but it's not within sight, that's not something that we would consider a possibility that the bird came from there. So we're back into the svar of Roiv trumps Karev. We also learned a Mishnah to support this halacha, and this is a Nida Shayla. So the Gemara in Nida tells us that the construction of a woman's body is there's a proizor, which is the entrance to her body, and then the proizor leads to the cheder, to the room, which is the uterus. The uterus is the source of the dam of a woman. But there's also another little chamber called the aliyah, which is a little chamber right on top of those two, sort of in the middle. And there's an opening from that aliyah into the proizor. I wonder if that's the bladder. I'm not sure exactly what that aliyah is physically. So what happened is so you have a cheder, the uterus that opens up into the canal where you found the dam, but there's also an aliyah that's connected to that proizor. So if you found dam over here, it might have come from the uterus, and then this woman is tomei nida, but it also might have come from her bladder or from whatever this aliyah is that would not make her tomei. That's a regular scratch. So if you find dam, how do you know where it came from? So dam shenimtza beproizdar. If you find dam in the canal entering the body, sveikai tomei misafik rashin beferish. It's not a suffix. Since this case is a suffix, in this case the halacha that we pass by a suffix is that it's vadai tomei. Why is it vadai tomei? Shechazkasai min hamakar. Because the chazaka is the roiv is, which is what it means. Roiv dam that comes out of a woman comes from the uterus. There's a very small amount of dam that will come from somewhere else under certain conditions if there's a scratch somewhere. So shechazkasai min hamakar, the afal gav, the ika aliyah de makarba. The aliyah, that room on top of the proizor, is actually, as far as distances, it's actually closer. So you have a drop of dam that you found inside her. The closest place that it could have come from would have been the lul, that little opening that leads to the aliyah. If it came from a further place, then it could have come from the makar, from the uterus, which would make a dam nida. Well, and what do we say? You go basar the roiv. Since roiv dam comes from the uterus, we go basar roiv, and we don't go basar karev. We don't say it came from the closer place. So you have a raya from here that roiv, the karev, roiv trumps. Amalei rava, this is not a regular roiv. This is roiv u'matzi kamrit. Let me ask you a question. The uterus every month cranks out dam. The lul and the aliyah will only put out dam if there's a problem here. So it's not just that the roiv, the dam here comes from the uterus. It's the norm for dam to come from the uterus. So there's a much stronger argument that the dam came from the uterus than just the roiv. So there, Zok Rava, of course, if it's roiv u'matzei, lekelaman da'amar, nobody's going to argue and say that karev would be more powerful. In a regular case of roiv karev, you don't have a raya. So Rava says you don't have a raya from the Brisa in Nida to Rab Chanina. Gewaltig. The Tani Rab Chia. Now here, there's this little dalit over here is a subject of great controversy, because did Tani Rab Chia would indicate that Rava is trying to bring a raya to his argument. Rava is trying to bring a raya to his argument that roiv u'matzi nobody disagrees with. But as we learn, we're going to find that there is no raya. So therefore, I think Tosfos takes out the dalit. But let's have a look. The Tani Rab Chia, dam hanimse beproizda. Rab Chia said, if you find dam in the proizda, it's vadai tamei chayovin alav al beis mikdash. If a woman saw dam in the proizda and she went into the base of mikdash, she brings a carbon. You don't bring a carbon for a suffix. Here she's bringing a vadai carbon. She's bringing a vadai carbon, meaning this is not a suffix. This is a vadai. So clearly, we see that halach is you go boss to the right. And v'sarfin love is a truma. Normally, if you have a truma that's suffix tabe, you don't burn it. Toilet, you just hold on to it. But here you burn truma for it. So clearly she's vadai tam. But Amar Rava, and Rava commented, Shmami namid Rab Chia tlas. From Rab Chia's halacha, we learn 3 halachas. Shmami na roiv v'karv halach acharoiv. So right over here we have to stop. How do you see Roiv Korv Halach Achar? A moment ago, we said that it's a Roiv Motzi. So here's where you have the problem with the Ditani. We'll look at Tosfos in just a minute, but let's look at the other two extractions that Rava makes from Reb Chia's halacha. Ushmamina Ruba Dairaisa. You see that we follow Roiv is Dairaisa. Tosfos is going to ask another question. What do you mean Shmamina Ruba Dairaisa? Everybody knows Roiv is Dairaisa. But it's a big thing in the Rishonim, but we'll see that in a minute. Ushmamina Isa l'Rab Zera. You see a hold of Reb Zera. What does Reb Zera say? Zok Reb Zera. The Amar Reb Zera, let's look at Rashi, Isa l'Rab Zera. The Amar Reb Zera said, the famous case of Roiv is you have a plaza, and in that plaza, there are 9 stores that sell kosher meat, and one store that sells tray for the meat, and you found a piece of meat in the parking lot. So you say, Kala Parish, Maruba Parish, it probably came from a kosher store, and you're not eating. The Amar Gabetesha Chanuyas Bishili Per Kamadaksumas. The Nimsa, if you found it in the parking lot, halach achar roiv, and therefore it's mutter. And the Gemara adds, Dafal Pi, Abzera adds, the Avavisha Dalsois Medina Nuulois. We cannot mix Ruba de Alma into this equation because the doors of this Medina were sealed. So there's only this Shiloh that we have in front of us. The Leka Lachad Ruba Lachshera. But if the doors were open to the city and you have roiv butchers are Yidden, so then you have a double roiv over here. Not only in this plaza, Mineu Pei, is it roiv ksheros, but even in the Velt, it's roiv ksheros. Even if you don't have that, even if you're only looking at this one roiv, which is roiv ha'ir, shetesha chanuyosh, shaba, moiches basar shchuta, v'achas, moicheres nevela, the Ika mill, so there are some things that require 2 roivs in order to be matter them. What if the doors of the dinner was open and now it's possible that this meat came from other butchers? And now roiv of the butchers are also Yisrael. So that adds another dimension of roiv. So you have a right to observe that you don't need a double roiv, a single roiv will be enough. Even though there's no possibility that it came from anywhere else, it's only this shiloh here that we're looking at. Which one of these stores the meat fell from? So here too is the same thing. There's no way this dam came from anybody else's body, right? It only came from her body. So you only have the roiv, that roiv dam comes from a uterus. Didn't Rava just say a moment ago that roiv umatzi lekalam the amar? So Rava here brings a whole big raya from Reb Chia that you go about to roiv, but by a woman, didn't the Rava just say that by roiv umatzi everybody agrees you go about to the roiv umatzi, but you don't have a raya to the general single roiv? So Gemara had be Rava mayahi. Rava was chayzer. What was he chayzer from? I don't know. Was he chayzer from the fact that roiv umatzi is much better than a regular roiv? Or was he chayzer from the fact that they're bringing a raya from a b'chia that you go basaroi? I don't know that yet. So let's have a peek in Tosfos. De Tani Reb Chia. Zok Tosfos, Igar Sinan Tani, and we skip the little Dalit, Asi Shapir, that will be much better to understand the Gemara. Avaligar Sinan De Tani, if Rav is trying to bring a raya, his roivu motzi from a b'chia, tema. It makes no sense at all. Heichi maisi mehacha the roivu motzihu. How would you bring a raya from the case of Reb Chia that roivu motzi trumps everything? Who said that in the case of Reb Chia it works because of roivu motzi? Dilma lav mishum the roivu motzi ka Reb Chia the sarfin the lavas atruma. Who said the way to explain Reb Chia is because there's a roiv and a motzi? Maybe Reb Chia holds that el mishum the roiv v'karv halachar roiv. Reb Chanina. Maybe Reb Chia holds like Reb Chanina, and then the reason why he said it's Vadai Tameh is not because of Rav Motzi, which was Rabba's new theory. Maybe it was just because of the Rav. So if Rabba was trying to bring a riot to his halacha of Rav Motzi from Reb Chia, how do you see that? So therefore, if you go to Tani, then it's just a new halacha, it's a new case. we're bringing a brisa, we're bringing a B'chia, and we're bringing a Rav who says something about it, then we have a kasha on Rav. It's a completely separate sugya. If it's a raya, it makes no sense. But veneerly, Zokta says maybe we could somehow justify what type of raya Rav was actually trying to bring from B'chia. Veneerly, the filu grasinon ditani. Maybe it's loy midivi Ravahu. It can't be Rava's words because it doesn't make sense for Rava. Maybe the Gemara said, you know what, Rava? You have a good point. Maybe the Gemara is trying to bring a raya. And the Gemara who, the Ma'asila, the Shaper Avamuchach Abayim Imasnisen, that I would have a good raya from a Mishnah, from the Mishnah of Nida, the Roy V'Karov, Halach Acher Roy. The Afagav, the Katani, Svei Kaitame, even though, not the Brisa of B'chia, but the earlier Brisa, where it says Svei Kaitame, so it's mashma that you don't go Basra with Tasofik, Al Korchach Lav Sveikahu. All we're trying to bring a raya from B'chia is that even though the Mishnah used the word Svei Kaitame, it doesn't mean that it's really a Sofik and you're machmer misofik. It's actually a Psak Halacha. And the raya that is a Psak Halacha is Midatani Rabchia de Chayav and Alav, Albias Mikdash, Vesarfan Alav Trum. So that's all we were trying to do, is show that this dam that's Tameh is Vadai Tameh, it's not Sofik Tameh. Umaram Oimer, the Rava Maisila. It's Rava who's bringing a raya. The Roivu Matzehu, it's Roivu Matzeh, and Rava is trying to bring a raya from a B'chia that Roivu Matzeh, everybody agrees, is Adif from Karev. The Eine Matzeh, oh no, it was, I'm sorry, Rava's raya is not that what Allah is by Roivu Matzeh, but Rava is trying to prove from a B'chia that the case of Nida is Roivu Matzeh. The Eine Matzeh, if it's not Matzeh, in my Kamash Malon, Rab Chanina. What is Rab Chanina's whole chiddush that you go Basarai? Kivin the Shema'inin law, Midatani Rab Chia. That's a beautiful part. Rab Chia clearly says, at least even if you want to say it's only a case of Roiv Matzeh, but clearly Rab Chia says that by Nida it's Vadei Tameh. So now Rab Chanina comes along to tell me that Roiv trumps Karim. How do you know what is Rab Chanina's chiddush? If all Rab Chanina meant is a case of Roiv Matzeh, so all Rab was trying to do is Rab Chanina meant. If all Rab Chanina is trying to pick a case of Roiv Matzeh, what's his chiddush? We already have that from Rab Chia. So it must be Rab Chanina is trying to say a bigger chiddush than what you would see from Rab Chia, and that even Roiv alone trumps Karim. They tell you Rab Chia, from the Mishnah Nida, Zok Rabbi, you couldn't prove that Rab Chanina is even thinking about a regular Roiv. Even if it's not Roiv Umatzi, you couldn't prove that. But there it says, we said Sveikoi Tami. So therefore, Hutruk Chanina Lashminon, to lay name a Sveikoi Tami, have a Sofik Mamish. Don't learn shot in the Mishnah that Sveikoi Tami is Sofik Mamish. So all Reb Chanina is telling us is that it's a Vadai, but it still might be Roiv Umatzi. Now that we have Reb Chia who says it more explicitly, so Reb Chanina's only chiddush could possibly be that Roiv by itself is going to trump Karev. The Hadabe Rava, because Amar, the like have a Roiv Umatzi, and then when Rava learned from Reb Chia you have a right to Roiv alone, Itzrik Reb Chanina Lashminon, now Reb Chanina once again has to tell us. The Imi the Tani Reb Chia, from Reb Chia alone, I would not have known, have a meaning the Roiv Umatzi, because that might be Roiv Umatzi. Kamash Malon Reb Chanina, the law of Roiv Umatzi. Okay, so where is Tosfos at the end? Tosfos says over here, let's talk about Ushmami Naruba Daraisa. Chashav Lei, so Tosfos is asking the Kasha, we already know that Roiv is Daraisa. Zok Tosfos, there's two Roivs. There's Aruba the Isa Kamon, where you mamish have a case of Achirab al Hatis, that the Miot is bought on the Roiv. But there's also something called Aruba the Lesser Kamon. The Roiv of Dam coming from the uterus, that's a Ruba the Lexicon. It's a statistic. Statistic is a Ruba the Lexicon. You don't actually have a Roiv and actually have a Miyad. We just say that most Dam comes from the uterus, or Roiv Mitsuyin Eitzel Shchita, or Mumchanein. These are all statistics. You don't actually have a Roiv and a Miyad. So that's what the Gemara is saying. Chashav le Ruba the Lexicon. The Chiddush is that not only is Aruba the Isakamon Daraisa, but even Aruba the Lexicon is Daraisa. The Aruba the Isakamon Loitarch made it. We don't need a diuk that Shemamina that Aruba the Isakamon you go Basarai. The crux is Acharab Lahati. The Tosfos was learning the deraisa that says in the pasuk acharei rab malados is a rubid isakaman. You have 9 dayonim that say chayiv, 1 day that says potter. That's a rubid isakaman. There you'll say acharei rab malados. But by statistic, mehechatesi there you also go by rubid deraisa. Kamash malon Rab Zera that roiv is deraisa. Where is Tosfos? Where Tosfos actually says beferish that it was. Let me see where Tosfos says it. Tosfos says beferish who it was. Oh, 1 second. Does it say it over here? I don't see where it says it. I saw it yesterday. Sometimes I'm staring right at it, and I don't see it. But I think it says that the Rava. Oh, here it is. Oh no, L'mayda Hadebe Rava B'Ka'amar L'Hava Roiv U'Matzi. So Tosfos beferish. What when it says Hadebe Rava? It's Hadebe Rava from claiming that the case of Nida is Roiv U'Matzi, rather it's only a Roiv. So Hadebe Rava Me'ahi Hamish Taina that you don't have a Roiv from Nida. Right, Rava, you don't have a Roiv from Nida, but Nida is not just a Roiv, it's a Roiv U'Matzi. That's Svara Rava backed down from, and he considers Nida just a regular Roiv, and therefore you have a Raya to Rab Chanina that you go Basra Roiv, even though Korv says other. Okay, gewaltig. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. So we're still discussing Roivakar. Itmar. Chavish Shetzafa B'Nahar. You have a chavish that's rolling down the river. And we don't know, is this kosher wine, is it Jewish wine or not? So Amar Rav Paskin, Nimtas Keneged Ir, Sheruba Yisrael. What if you found it in the river, near a place where it's Roiv Yisrael? Muteris, the barrel is mutter to use. Keneged Ir, Sheruba Nachrim, Asura. This sounds very much like you go Basra Korah, right? Depending on where you found it. Ushmul Amar, Afilu Nimtas Keneged Ir, Sheruba Yisrael, Asura, because Roiv people in the world are Goyim, so it probably came from Goyim. Dr. Gemara Amar, Mehai Dakra Osi. Let's say that it came from this city. So Dr. Gemara, let me see the base. Mehai Dakra is not this city. It means it's a city called the Dakra that's going to be a Goyish city, because that's where the Roiv is. So let me see the Gimel. Ema the Mei the Kirasi. It's some type of city that was a Goyish city, that was a big city, and now that you go Basra. So let's say that this is Mamish Tamach. You go Basra, who do you go Basra Karib? The Mar Israel Rab Chanina, and you go Basra, which would be Shmuel, and therefore he's machmer to Asher the wine. Umar Lesle Rab Chanina, Neil you go Basra Karib, and therefore Rav will say if it's near a Jewish city, he will assume it came from a Jewish city. So this machlokes has nothing to do with the general shaila of Roiv Karib. There are specific reasons why here you would follow the Karib over the Roiv. The Chulam is told Rab Chanina. Really, even Rav holds that Roiv would trump. Hakam is matter it over here if you find it in the river near a Jewish city. The Marasavar, Rav holds the Mizadu Mehai Dakrasi. If you're going to say it came from far away from that big Goyish city, Akuli Ufashuri have a matfila. It's going down the river. There's rapids. There's places where off to the side there's no flow, no current at all. So what is the likelihood that this barrel would have made its way so far down the river where it would have probably got swallowed up at one point or another from a rapid and would have gotten pulled down and destroyed? Or it might have been thrown off to the side of the river where there's no current and it would just got stuck on shore somewhere. The likelihood that it made it all the way here is very, very low, and therefore you can't go Basra. You have to go Basra. Umar Sabra and Shmuel would hold, no, something's running down a raging river, it's not going to get sucked anywhere. The speed and the velocity that's surging down the river will not let it get cut up. So I guess they're arguing in what are the chances in such a case where there's a raging river that it's going to get stopped. We know there's never a machlokes mitzias, so whatever the likelihood is in a raging river of this barrel to get pulled off to the side and not make it, whatever that statistic is that considered enough of a statistic to worry about and say that it didn't come from there, and therefore it must come from local. Okay, zok to right. Who chatzva the chamra the shtakach bepardisa. Someone had a paradise that it was Erla. All of its pears were still also. And you found in it a little jug of wine. Now, how did this jug get there? It didn't get there from the owner. Someone must have stolen the jug of wine and hid it there. So the question is, do we have to assume that it came from here, curve, and therefore it is orla, this wine? Or maybe it came from somebody else's property, and you go Basra Roiv, and therefore it should be mutter to drink. So Shari Ravina allowed it to be drank, meaning you need to go Basra Roiv, not Basra Karev. Maybe it's because he holds you go Basra Roiv, not Basra Karev. But no, this is not either relevant to our Shaila. Shiny Hosam, the Migniv Mina, if the Ganiv that stole this jug stole it from the owner of the Kerem, he wouldn't hide it in the victim's Kerem. The Migniv Mina, Atnui Bigavei, Loy Matzni, he would never have hid it in the owner's property. It makes sense that he stole it from somebody else's property and he hid it here. That's only if it's a jug of wine. I will envy, what if it's just a cluster of grapes? Mitzni, it's possible that he stole it Minei from this Kerem and is hiding it there. I guess it's not as noticeable, and therefore, in fact, you would say it would be Arla if he found grapes. But if he found wine, we'll say you go Basaroiv, because there's no Karev here, because nobody would ever think to hide what he stole in the property of the owner who he stole it from. Hanu Zika are even smaller jug. So I think a chatz was like a cheres jug. A ziki is like in a leather pouch. So it's a little bit of almost like a canteen. It was found amongst kufoi, which Rashi teaches Tamunim ben gefonim shebekerem, Bishal Yisrael. So it was, they found a little flask of wine that was also in a kerem. Sharanu Rava wanted to say it's mutter. Once again, so Rashi, let's look at Beit Kafay again. Tamunim ben Gefalim Shebekerem Bishal Yisrael, and they belong to Yisrael. So Sharunu Rava wanted to say it's mutter. So Dr. Gemara, Lema Loy Savalol Drabchin. It must be he doesn't hold a Kabchin, because Roy would be goyim. Dr. Rashi, Vekan Yisrael Mutsuyim Yosy Binochim, if you say you go Basar Karev, this field belongs to a Yid. So that's why he seemed to have been matter. There's a Roy Ruba de Almo that says that this wine would be Yain. So Gemara, Shiny Hasam, the Ruba, the Shefuchai Yisrael. Even if Roy people around here are goyim, but most of the people that package the wine from the barrels into these canteens are Yisrael. So the chances are that a canteen would have been stolen from a Yid. So again, you don't look at a big picture right here, because there's a small picture right here related to flasks. That's when they're big canteens. So Yidden would make big canteens, bulk canteens, to carry wine. But when people travel, they would have much smaller canteens, individually packaged. Like instead of a big water bottle, they would carry a small water bottle to drink along the way. Avos found small water bottles that likely came from travelers, because who has small water bottles? People who are traveling through, and therefore that would have been usher, because chances are it fell from a guy that would be Ayin Nesach. But what happens? What if he found a whole bunch? He found a whole bunch of big canteens and small. So what do you say there? There you say for sure it fell from the Yid. Why are there small bottles there? Very simple. If they're packaging these big canteens, what do they do with them? They load them onto donkeys. Usually, you load them on a type of saddle that allows one bag to hang down on either side. What if one bag is heavier and you want to balance the weight? So even the people who sold these big canteens also had some small ones just to use to balance the weight. So therefore, we could still assume it came from a Yid. Now we have one little bump that we have to take care of on Namad Aleph. You found this jug of wine in a kerem that was Arla. So we want to say maybe it didn't come from this kerem, it came from somewhere else. If it came from somewhere else, we have much bigger problems on our hands. It might not be Arla, but now how do you know it didn't come from a guy? So let's have a look at Tosfos. Zog Tosfos, Leima Mishum the Savala Krab Chanina, and therefore you go Basaroiv, and therefore even though this kerem is Arla, you ignore the fact that it's Karev. Velekalamemer the Shari Mishum the Suffolk Arla v'chutz la'aretz muteris. You can't say that it's muter. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to next. Snui b'gavei. Im tamer v'gdoizus. V'kamokim yaser to rubud al menochem ninu. V'aviyayin esach. Forget the problem of Arla. If you're going to say it came from out of this karam of Arla, it's even worse. Now it's yayin esach. Yishleimer the roiv ganve Yisrael. We know this was stolen. Who steals? Only Eden steal. So if we know this was stolen, this Ganav for sure wouldn't steal from a guy because he's not going to be able to do anything with it. So he's an Erlich Ganav. He's a crook. He steals wine, but I'm still makbid. I only steal kosher wine. So more the Getaisvis, right? We know that this had to have been stolen by Yid because Roiv Ganavim are Yisrael, and even the Ganavim they're Erlich. They would never drink yain. What that? I know it sounds like someone who read the protocols. Zog the Gemara weiter. Marchiken es ha'ilan min ha'ir. Marchiken es ha'ilan min ha'ir. Esrim v'chamei sham. If you want to plant a tree, it has to be 25 amos away from a city. The Gemara will explain it has to do with a city is only beautiful if there's some flat land around it. Ubecharuva v'shikma, which has a lot of branches, it makes much more, has much more of a presence. Chamishim amo, you'd have to be 50 amos away. Abisholoimer, kol ilan tzrak, every tree without fruits, chamishim amo will require 50 amos. Ema ir kadma, if there was a city there, and then someone planted a tree outside of it, kaitates, you have to cut that tree down. The einoi noisem domen, and the city doesn't have to pay for the tree. You should never have planted that tree. But when ilan kadam, so the person had a right to plant that tree, then kaitates b'noisem domen. Yes, we forced the tree to be cut down, but the city has to compensate the owner of the tree. What about Suffolk Zeh Kodam? The Suffolk Zeh Kodam. What if we don't know what happened first? Then kaitates, first you got to cut it. But ain't a nice and you don't have to pay it all. So we're going to have to see why. Zog to Gemara. My time, what's the reason in general why you're not allowed to have trees near a city? It has to do with the beauty of the city. Fact Gemara, why do you need that svara? We have another svara. But typically, the ein oisin sada migrash. You're not allowed to make a field into a migrash. And relevant to us, like migrash sada. You're not allowed to make a midrash into a soda. A midrash is the area around the city, 1,000 amos around the city. You're not allowed to make it into a soda, so you're not allowed to plant there. So never mind Noya here, there's another halacha that you can't do that. Zok to Gemara lo tzrich. We're going according to Rabbi Lazar, Damar Oishin Sada Midrash, Umigrash Sada. According to Rabbi Lazar, you don't have that restriction of midrash, but there's still an issue of Noya here, you have to stay 25 or 50 amos. Hakam Mishum Noya here, lo yavdinu. But even according to Rabbanan, our Mishnah makes sense. Why you need this additional restriction of 25 amos. You know what you're not allowed to plant around the city? When you said you can't make a midrash into a soda, means you can't plant there a little vegetable. Trees are more beautiful. There you could do it because that doesn't take away from the beauty of the city. However, so I'm wrong. That you can't plant and keep it flat, that's Tafkas Royim. But Ilona should be allowed to. But maybe Noya year to make it too close, that's a problem. Zok to Gemara, we not tamer, how would I know the shiny Bein Zroyim Lilonis? How do I know, in fact, that you could make that distinction, that the Migrash only answers Zroyim, but not Ilonis? The Tanya we learned. Karfif Yoser Mebeis Hosayim, Filkavildi. Karfif is a big lot, like a park. A graveyard has the din of a karfif. This is relevant to Shabbos over here. So you got a karfif, a big park, but it was hukaf ladira, meaning you put a wall around it. So you want to make it into a Rosh Hashanah, you want to be able to carry in it, but you put the wall around it with the intent of having a house there that you're going to live there. So the Allah is nizra rubai. If you planted roy with zroyim, hareu kagina va'aser. You can't tell me that you were doing it ladira, because it's roy planted with zroyim. That proves that it's not real ladira. You're saying that, but it's not a real ladira. It's really a kina, and therefore it's not a rishus yachid. It's a rishus harabim, and you're not allowed to carry there for amas. But nita ruboy. What if you planted many trees? Hareu kachatzer muter. Why? Because you see from here that it's normal that someone would plant trees in his chater, I guess it adds to the beauty. That's a normal thing. You're not going to plant a vegetable garden all over your chutzner. That says that it's not ladira, but ladira doesn't make sense that someone's going to plant trees. Let's see Rashi. Nizra rubai, potlu azroyim shem dira mimen. The fact that there's royim there tells me that it's a farm. It's not a home. Bareu kagina she'ena kefel ladira, and therefore hoyel v'yasim beis hasaimi. Since it's more than beis hasaim, a metaltal boil, you can't carry it. Aval nida rubai be'ilanois ein hoilanois mevatlin tyrus dirasim mimen. That wouldn't be a problem because it's normal in a house to have trees. Right? People plant trees in their front yards and backyards. But most people, they might have a vegetable patch, but that's not part of the decorative part of their front and backyard. Okay. Zok to Gemara weiter. We had a case earlier that you have to be away from a bar, right? The kadani koitet b'noisendam. We say that even if I illegally planted the tree and therefore you could force me to cut down the tree, I could demand of the balabar to pay me for the value of the tree. And what's happens over here? The kadani koitet b'noisendam. In both cases, I didn't have a right to plant the tree. When there's a bar there, I can demand payment. When there's a city there, I can't demand payment. What's the difference? Amrav Kahana, Kidra de Beishutfi. We have a rule. Whenever you're dealing with a rabbim, you're never going to get anything done. You're never going to get anything done. So what is this point? Zok to Gemara. Everyone's expecting somebody else to pay. Afkan over here as well. You know why? I cannot claim payment from the city because Afkan Demeya Elon, who's going to pay? In Bas Latinum al Bnei Ha'ir, if you're going to say the city is responsible to pay, so who am I going to collect from? Don't come to me first. Go to him first. When you collect from him, then come back to me. I'm not giving first. The Nimta Elon, what's going to happen is the Elon is going to stand there forever. But Ir Maguna, and the city will be ugly. Then to Teferis Eretz Yisrael. Rashi just dropped a bombshell there. Rashi says that this whole thing with the tree and the city only applies in Eretz Yisrael. That's going to be very relevant. I don't think I'll get to it because we're running late. It's already 6:50. I have to finish the Gemara. So I'll call upon them. Zok Rashi. If you say that the city has to pay, they're never going to come up with the money. The tree's never going to get cut down. So therefore, they were forced to say, cut down the tree. And too bad for the owner of the tree, and he won't be able to get paid because he'll never be able to get paid. But when you're dealing with a yochid who has a bar next door, there you have something to collect from. So I'll say, yeah, I'll knock the tree down. Pay me, and I'll be happy to knock the tree down. So Zok to Gemara. My kusha, I don't understand. What the whole kasha in the first place? Why is it that by the bar, I make my neighbor pay me for the tree, but by a city, the city doesn't pay? Forget about Kedei Veshutfi. Don't mashayne zeket the rabbim, zeket the yochid. The answer is simple. When you damage a city, too bad for you. You damage a city knowingly. You weren't allowed to plant the tree. You're not getting paid. But if it was just a yochid, maybe there you will make the guy pay. So you don't need a svara. Itmad Rav Kahana. This svara of Kedei Veshutfi, he said it regarding something else. I'll say itma. Ima Elon Kadam. If the tree came first, then koitet v'nois and dam, and then the city does have to pay. Frank the Gemara, the leimalahu havu li bereisha dami v'ader ekutz. Why can't I say? What do you mean koitet v'nois and dam? No. First pay me, then I'm going to cut it. On that, Amar Kahana kidru deveshutvi loy chamima v'loy kariva. If we force them to pay first, they'll never pay, and then it'll never get cut down, and it's not Teferis Yisrael. So therefore, first cut it down, and then you go to bed, and you'll have to work it out. But we need to get it cut down. Safek zek hadam, v'safek zek hadam, then koitet v'ein dam. Frank, I don't understand. Ma'ishem a bar, damar leikot. By bar, it says if you don't know which one, hey, first you can't force me to cut the tree down. Over here by the city, you force me to cut the tree down, and you don't have to pay. So tomorrow, hasam devadai lav lemeketz koi. By a bar, where if my tree was for sure there before the bar, the halacha didn't have to cut it down at all. It's too bad for you. You have to move your bar. Therefore, sveikoi, since it's a suffix, I might not be mechuyev to move my tree. Therefore, nami lo yamina lekoitz. But here, even if you put the tree there first, the mission says you're mechuyev to cut it down anyway. So therefore, there's no suffix on whether or not you have to cut it. You for sure have to cut it. So therefore, sveikai nami yamina lekoitz. First cut it. The imishim dami. I mean, like I what's for sure is for sure. You for sure have to cut it down. There's still a subject whether we have to pay. So bring a raya and you'll have to pay. Talk to more about it. Marchikin is goyin kavua 6:52. You know what? I'll have to stop here. So I'll tell Mintzberg to start from here on Shabbos. I'm going to Bilyurt. Moshe invited me, so I'm going. So I'm not going to be here, but I'm going to say Shemot Shabbos, but I'll tell him to start from Marchikin.